The truth is hiding in plain sight. James is standing in the middle of an IKEA showroom, holding a small paper measuring tape in one hand and a shopping list in the other. On that list, a bookshelf, a rug, a lamp, and a couch. Simple enough, except every single item on that list has a name that sounds like it belongs to a different person, or a different country, or possibly a different planet. The bookshelf is called Billy. The couch is called Ektorp. The rug is called Stockholm. The lamp is called something he can't even pronounce on the first try. He glances at his shopping list again, then back at the shelf tags, and for a second he just stands there, half smiling, half confused, the way you do when something feels like a joke you're not quite in on. He's been in this store 100 times. Everyone has. Millions of people push carts through these exact same aisles every single week, past thousands of products with names like Malm and Poing and Kallax, and almost nobody ever stops to ask the obvious question. Why does a global furniture company, one of the biggest retailers on earth, refuse to just call a bookshelf Model 4? Every other store on the planet uses numbers, model numbers, SKU codes, simple, boring, forgettable strings of digits. This one company deliberately chose not to. And once James notices it, he can't unnotice it. He starts walking the showroom floor differently, the way you'd walk through a room after somebody told you there was a hidden camera in it somewhere. He starts reading name tags instead of price tags, and what he sees only deepens the mystery. It's not just that the names are strange, it's that they seem to follow some kind of pattern he can't quite crack. Chairs and desks all sound like men's names. Curtains and fabrics sound like women's names. Outdoor furniture sounds like it belongs on a map of remote islands. A company that sells over 12,000 different products, in dozens of countries, in a dozen different languages, somehow has a naming system organized enough to feel deliberate, and confusing enough to feel like an accident. So today's business file opens with a question that sounds almost silly at first. Why does IKEA furniture have such strange names? But underneath that question is a much bigger one. Is this branding genius, or is it just chaos that happened to work? Before we open this file any further, hit like, drop a comment with your first guess about why IKEA does this, and subscribe with notifications on, because the answer connects to something almost nobody expects. To understand where this naming system actually came from, you have to go back decades before there was a single IKEA store anywhere in the world. Back to a teenager in rural Sweden with a bicycle, a notebook, and a business built entirely out of his own bedroom. His name was Ingvar Kamprad, born in 1926 in Småland, one of the poorer farming regions in Sweden. As a young boy, Kamprad was already selling things: matches, seeds, pens, Christmas decorations, pedaling around the countryside on his bicycle, running what was essentially a one-child mail-order business before he was even a teenager. In 1943, at just 17 years old, he formally founded a company. He named it using the first letters of his own name, the farm where he grew up, and the nearby village where he was raised, Ingvar Kamprad, Elmterid, Agunarid. Put those initials together, and you get the name of the company, IKEA. At first, IKEA didn't sell furniture at all. It sold pens, wallets, picture frames, nylon stockings, small household items shipped by mail order to customers across Sweden. Furniture didn't enter the picture until a few years later. And like every mail order business of that era, IKEA organized its growing product catalog the same way everyone else did, with numbers, item codes, a ledger of digits, each one representing a different product, the same system every catalog business on Earth was already using. That system should have been fine. It's the system the entire retail world still runs on today. But for young Ingvar Kamprad, it wasn't fine at all. And the reason had nothing to do with the size of his catalog, and everything to do with something going on inside his own head, that for most of his life, he never had a name for either. Kamprad struggled with dyslexia. At the time, dyslexia wasn't something schools screened for or even talked about much. It was simply something a person had to work around quietly, on their own, without anyone giving it a label. For Kamprad, numbers were especially difficult. Long strings of digits didn't stay organized in his mind the way they did for other people. Item codes blurred together. Order forms became a minefield of easy mistakes. As his catalog of products kept growing, from a handful of items to dozens, then hundreds. The numeric system that worked fine for everyone else was quietly becoming close to unusable for the one person who needed to remember it best: the founder himself. Here's where most business stories would expect a simple fix. Hire a bookkeeper, build a better filing system, let someone else handle the numbers. But that's not the direction this story goes, because Kamprad didn't try to work around his dyslexia. He built his entire company's identity out of it. Instead of matching each product to a number, he started matching each product to a word, something his brain could actually picture. Kamprad later explained it simply. It came about because he had dyslexia and had trouble figuring out item numbers. So instead of numbers, they used names. A word is a picture in your mind in a way 7 random digits never can be. If a bookshelf is called 4471B, you have to memorize a code with no meaning attached to it. But if that same bookshelf is called Billy, your brain does something numbers can never do. It forms an image, a personality, a shape you can actually hold on to. That single decision, swap the numbers for names, could have stayed a private workaround, a quirky internal habit at one small Swedish company that nobody outside its warehouse would ever notice. Except IKEA didn't stay small. It grew into thousands of products, sold across more than 40 countries, in languages that don't even share the same alphabet. And that's exactly where this story gets more interesting. Because a system built to solve one man's personal difficulty with numbers was about to be tested at a scale nobody could have designed for on purpose. Picture the scale of the problem this created. Once IKEA expanded past a single Swedish catalog into a truly global company, its product naming needed to work for teams of designers, warehouse staff, and shoppers speaking dozens of different languages, all while keeping every single product name distinct, memorable, and consistent no matter which country it launched in. A word that works fine in Swedish might mean something completely different, or nothing at all, in Japanese or Spanish or Arabic. If the whole system had just been, pick any word you like, it would have collapsed into total chaos within a few years. Thousands of employees across dozens of countries, all naming things however they personally felt like it, all working from the same enormous catalog. That's not a naming system anymore. That's just noise. So here's the real clue James needs to notice back on that showroom floor. Those names he thought looked chaotic actually follow rules so consistent that IKEA employees still use them today, decades after Kamprad first came up with the idea. And once you know what those rules are, you start seeing something almost nobody else in that store is seeing. Quick reminder before we go further. If this is the kind of hidden business logic you enjoy uncovering, make sure you're subscribed and sharing this with someone who's ever gotten lost trying to pronounce an IKEA product name in the checkout line. Here's how the categories actually break down, and once you hear them, you'll never walk through that store the same way again. Large furniture, the big pieces, like sofas and dining tables, tend to be named after Swedish place names. Bookcases carry either men's first names or job titles. That's why the company's single best-selling piece of furniture in the world carries a man's name at all. Chairs and desks get Scandinavian men's names. Fabrics, curtains, and textiles get Scandinavian women's names. Outdoor furniture is named after islands scattered across Scandinavia. Rugs draw their names from towns in Denmark. Bathroom accessories are frequently named after lakes and rivers back in Sweden. Even children's products, kitchen tools, and lighting each have their own dedicated naming category, quietly running in the background of a catalog most shoppers assume is just being cute. This is where the mystery starts to bend into something else entirely. Because this isn't random whimsy dressed up as branding. It's a full internal taxonomy. A coding system every bit as organized as the numeric codes it replaced, just built out of words instead of digits. A designer somewhere at IKEA doesn't sit down and think of a cute-sounding name. They open a rulebook and select from an approved category, the same way another company's employee might be handed a numeric range to assign a new product code from. The whimsy is real, but it sits directly on top of a rigid, almost bureaucratic structure most customers never notice. And that includes some very specific, very real names. IKEA's single best-selling piece of furniture. A simple, adjustable bookcase first designed in 1979 by an early employee named Gillis Lundgren, is named Billy. Not for any poetic reason. It's named directly after a real coworker, an IKEA advertising manager named Billy Liljedahl, who had been complaining that the company didn't offer a proper bookcase for people who just wanted somewhere to put their books. Lundgren sketched the design on the back of a napkin, worried he'd forget the idea otherwise, and named the finished product after the colleague whose complaint had inspired it. Today, it's estimated that a Billy bookcase sells somewhere in the world roughly every 5 seconds. A piece of furniture named, quite literally, after one ordinary guy in an office who wanted better shelving. So James is standing there in the showroom with a much clearer picture now, but there's still a piece of the puzzle missing. A rigid internal naming code explains how IKEA keeps 12,000 products organized without numbers. It explains the categories, the consistency, the discipline behind what looked like chaos. But it doesn't yet explain why this system became one of the most recognizable, most talked about, most quietly beloved parts of the entire brand. The reason people post online about their Malm dresser or their Puang chair the same way they'd talk about a pet. A purely internal filing system wouldn't do that on its own. Something else had to be happening at the same time. And that's the moment everything James has noticed finally clicks into place, all at once. The naming system wasn't just solving an internal organizational problem, it was accidentally solving a branding problem every single competitor in the furniture industry still struggles with today. Numbers are forgettable. Nobody falls in love with Model 4471B. But nobody forgets Billy either, because a name gives an object a personality, a story, a reason to exist as more than just furniture. What began as one dyslexic teenager's private workaround for remembering item codes had, decades later, turned into a marketing advantage that money alone couldn't have designed on purpose. A system that makes an ordinary bookshelf feel like a character in your home, and makes a global company built from flat-pack cardboard boxes feel oddly personal, oddly human, oddly Swedish, no matter what country you're shopping in. That's the real answer to the mystery. IKEA's furniture names aren't random, and they were never really about creativity for its own sake. They were the solution to one founder's personal struggle with numbers, formalized into a strict internal system precisely so it could survive being run by thousands of employees across dozens of countries. And that same discipline is exactly what made the names memorable enough to become one of the most quietly effective pieces of branding in retail history. The strangeness isn't a flaw in the system. The strangeness is the entire system working exactly as intended. Here's the lesson underneath all of it, and it's worth sitting with for a second. We tend to assume that a company's biggest strengths must come from careful, top-down strategy. A boardroom full of executives deciding on purpose to be clever. But some of the most powerful business advantages in the world were never designed to be advantages at all. They started as solutions to a very small, very personal problem. Ingvar Kamprad wasn't trying to build a legendary brand identity when he swapped numbers for names. He was trying to keep his own catalog straight in a mind that struggled with digits. He turned a limitation nobody would have chosen into a structure so useful it scaled to over 40 countries. And along the way, it became something customers didn't just tolerate, but genuinely loved. The real lesson for any business, big or small, is this. The workaround you build for your own weakness today might quietly become the thing that makes people remember you tomorrow. Take a second and think about your own daily habits, your own workarounds, the small systems you've built just to keep your own life or work organized. Most of them feel completely unremarkable while you're living inside them. A checklist, a color-coding trick, a strange personal shorthand nobody else would understand. But every so often, one of those small private fixes turns out to be more valuable than anything a strategist could have planned from scratch. That's the quiet magic behind a company as massive as IKEA. Underneath the blue and yellow warehouses and the flat-pack boxes and the impossible-to-pronounce product names, there's still just one teenager on a bicycle, trying to keep his own notes straight. File closed. If this changed the way you'll look at your next trip to IKEA, hit like, drop a comment telling us the strangest IKEA product name you've ever tried to pronounce, and share this with the friend who still can't say Kallax correctly. Turn on notifications and subscribe so you don't miss the next business file. Because next time, James stumbles onto a company that turned an ordinary, forgettable everyday purchase into one of the most quietly brilliant pricing strategies in retail history. And once you hear how it works, you'll never look at your own receipts the same way again.